This adventure challenge takes us through what's believed to be the oldest desert in the world, in Namibia, littered with sand dunes that are said to be some of the highest in the world. It's a land of beauty and danger, which we'll be crossing in the company of a man who's simply obsessed with deserts.
I'm Sam McConnell, and my adventure challenge is to traverse the dune sea of the Namib Desert, solo and unsupported, 100 kilometers west to east. Everything I need for this inhospitable environment, I'll have to carry on my back.
The dunes may be beautiful, but they're extremely hard to cross. Some of them are 1,000 feet high. Every footstep is a major effort.
This is really hard.
And the dunes are spread out in such a way it's impossible to walk in a straight line. Daytime temperatures out here can reach 40 Celsius, and there's absolutely no shade. But at night, temperatures plummet. So Sam could go from heat stroke to hypothermia in just a couple of hours.
You can see my breath, it's that cold, eh?
And then there are the poisonous scorpions and snakes lurking under the surface of the sand. But water will be Sam's main problem. He will only be able to carry a fraction of what a human being needs in an environment like this.
I've got just over 3 litres of water left, which is getting a bit grim.
Sticking to his path and making good time will be crucial. But there's another sting in this desert's tail. The dunes have a high metal content, which can send a compass way off course.
Pretty much walked in a circle.
Even if Sam survives snakes, scorpions, heat, cold and thirst, will he be able to navigate his way out of the sand without going around in circles? Or will he become lost in an ocean of sand? The Skeleton Coast, one of the most forbidding shorelines in the world. It marks the western edge of the Namib Desert. Countless mariners have lost their lives along the coast, their ships caught on sandbanks by strong currents or the thick fogs that are common here.
The joy of surviving a shipwreck. You're there on the beach, wow, fantastic, survived it. And then suddenly it dawns on you, you've still got a 100-kilometer barrier of sand between you and the next possible bit of water.
100 kilometers may not seem a long way to walk, but across territory like this, in which everything is against you, it is truly lethal. Some might think that to walk voluntarily from the coast across the desert is crazy. Few people ever choose to walk even part of the route. Most see it from the safety of a plane. From the sky, it's impossible to fully appreciate the dangers, but the beauty speaks for itself. Sam's adventure will, in theory, take him from the coast, through the dunes, all the way to a place called the Cesarium Canyon, the nearest reliable source of fresh water. Any shipwrecked mariner would have had to walk all the way here if they were to survive. It's all a far cry from Sam's home in London.
Well, this is my office in London. That's where we plan all of the expeditions and safaris from. I spend about on plus minus half the year here and then half the year either in Africa or other destinations in the world. Well, people ask me if I miss Namibia, and I would say yes, I certainly do, especially on a day like today in London. It's grey, 3 o'clock, it's getting dark, traffic's terrible, and there's hundreds of speed bumps everywhere.
No speed bumps out here though, just dust and heat. Sam's back in Namibia, ready for his adventure. It's 7 years since he first came here from London on a photographic assignment. Sam became a safari guide. Since then, he's taught himself how to survive in this arid environment. Well, my 7-year love affair with the desert must have started a long time ago, when I was watching films about deserts as a young lad. And I arrived in Namibia just on a pure luck as I was doing a shoot here. And suddenly, being out in these huge open spaces, I knew I had to spend more time here. The desert has now become his second home and his passion.
Well, I decided to walk across the Namib because after doing so many walking safaris out there on the edges of the desert, I was always very keen to see what was exactly over the next dune.
So far though, Sam's done no training at all for his walk, apart from running up and down the beach on holiday with his wife. So he's allowed himself plenty of time for practice walks in the heat of the desert. Some parts of his route are just about accessible in a four-wheel drive vehicle, so he can practice in a realistic environment and focus his mind on everything he's learned about life in the desert.
Well, climbing up the really big dunes is obviously fairly daunting. The trick is not to look at the top. If it's really steep and you're really tired, you just do 10 paces, take a break, do another 10 paces, take a break, do another 10 paces, take a break, and eventually you reach the top. On the coast, that you do have bowls of sand with a slip face all the way around. If you were to fall into one of these large holes, it would certainly be a struggle to get out, and certainly with such a full pack. This is the windward side of the dune, and this is the slip face of the dune. As you can see, the sand just falls away here. It's not compacted at all, and it's a nightmare to walk on. Another amazing thing here is people assume a desert is a dead place, but if you look down here, thousands and thousands of tracks, but everything's underground now. As soon as the sun comes out, everybody buries itself.
His recce takes him to the ominously titled Dead Flay, which will be the halfway point on his walk. Dead Flay is a large expanse of dry white clay surrounded by massive dunes. As Sam continues his training walk, he passes the ghostly 500-year-old corpses of camel thorn acacia trees. These trees were probably alive when Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope at the end of the 15th century. They're a reminder of how quickly water evaporates in the Namib. This was once a floodplain. Now the nearest fresh water is 50 kilometers away.
We're out here in Dead Flay. It's probably nearly 40 degrees in the shade, and we're not in the shade at the moment. There's not much of that around.
Finally, he checks out his ultimate destination, Sesrium Canyon. If he can walk here all the way from the coast, he will have crossed the desert. This is the first year-round source of water between here and the Atlantic.
This is the end of my walk. This is perennial spring at Sesrium Canyon. I have to be very quiet and not move too much, because as you can hear, there's a swarm of African honeybees here. Now, luckily for me, I don't actually have to drink that. But if I had made it out of the desert, this would be a very welcome sight.
The recce's now over. In the morning, the real thing begins. Explorer Sam McConnell is about to set out on a solo walk across the Namib Desert without any help or resupply of any kind. It will be an echo of the desperate and ultimately fatal journeys attempted by many shipwrecked mariners in years past. Sailors whose vessels foundered on the infamous Skeleton Coast and who then faced 100 kilometers of sand before the nearest source of drinking water. Unlike most of them, Sam knows where the water is. Even so, over such inhospitable terrain, will he be able to manage it? The night before he's due to set off, Sam sets up a base camp near to Sesrium Canyon. From here, he will be flown 100 kilometers or so to the Skeleton Coast. There are no roads. A helicopter is the only practical way in. His walk back inland, across the desert, will take him pretty well due east, through the dunes, past the deadpan at Dead Flay, and then through somewhat easier terrain back to the Sesrium Canyon.
This is basically all the kit I'm going to be taking with me into the desert, which should last me about 5 days. Weight is obviously an enormous issue. If you can imagine climbing up sand dunes without a pack, that's bad enough. Doing it with a huge pack is even worse. This is what it's all about. 15 litres of water, 3 litres a day for 5 days. I was advised by doctors here that I should take a minimum of 5 litres of water a day. But obviously the problem with that is if you take 5 litres a day, the weight increases, so therefore you're using more water to carry the water, and it's obviously going to slow you up even more.
So Sam will be carrying barely half the water he needs. Not a pleasant thought as he spends his last night in base camp.
Well, tomorrow morning I'm being dropped off on the Skeleton Coast, just south of Miob. And from there I've got a 53k walk, as the crow flies that is, to Scissors Flay stroke Dead Flay. Because we've left it so late in the year and it's starting to get very hot, I'm going to take the fast track option and walk straight to Witberg, due east from the coast, and then due north up to Dead Flay, where I then meet the Sauchab River. And from there it's easy going down the gravel plain the final 2 days to Sesrim Canyon, where I find my first fresh water after 5 days.
The big day has arrived. The helicopter that will fly him to the Skeleton Coast touches down at Sam's base camp.
Just a handbrake, I take it.
The pilot, Steve Groves, is used to working in extreme conditions.
Hi, mate. You well? Yeah, great. Excellent.
An ex-Marine and former member of Britain's Special Forces, he's flown in the jungles of South America and the deserts of Southern Africa. Sam won't be carrying a radio on his walk. It would be far too heavy. Instead, once a day, Steve will fly over to check he's all right. However, this morning the problem is the weather. Steve's heard over the radio that weather conditions along the coast are too dangerous to attempt a landing.
Well, we were supposed to have left at 10:30 this morning, was the original ETD, but after Steve's been speaking to pilots who've actually flown over the coast, there's still thick fog there, which is obviously not ideal for landing, so we're basically going to give it another couple of hours, see if we can get in touch with any other pilots who've flown over that area, and take it from there, basically. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's a very typical localised weather on the coast. Usually lifts about 10 or 11 o'clock, so we've got plenty of time to ponder our thoughts and get on with it as far as planning is concerned.
As he waits for the fog to lift, Sam is feeling last-minute nerves. All the dangers he'll soon be facing race through his mind.
The main worry is heat stroke, just basically overheating, and then you become disorientated. You can start making mistakes on your navigation and so on and so forth. I mean, scorpion bites and snake bites are obviously a worry. Scorpions, yeah, sure, I mean, they crawl into places, and you just have to be careful to make sure stuff's closed up, and just careful about your boots and stuff like that. Sandstorms could be a problem, especially this time of year. The wind can switch around to the east, which obviously blows down off the escarpment. That's just miserable, you know. You just have to hunker down and deal with it. My other worries, obviously, is dehydration, but I've got enough water for that.
As they wait for the fog to clear, they go over Sam's route one last time. The map will be of limited use, although it's the most recent one available to them. It's 30 years out of date. In that time, the dunes have shifted considerably, especially near the coast.
And this is the EPIRB. This is the only bit of kit that's really going to emergency stuff. So as I said before, it's on 1 to 1.5 megahertz, which is the radio beacon.
Yes.
In 45 minutes, we should have a satellite grid of 5 square kilometres. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
No.
Actually, I'm sure it won't.
Well, whatever happens, I shan't leave you in the desert.
Yeah. Well, basically, if nobody's seen or heard nothing of me after 5 days,
Can I have your boots?
you can have my boots.
Miami Aircraft 1248. This is ground station for helicopter Hotel Tango Romeo. Do you copy?
Finally, the call comes through that the fog has lifted. Steve starts up the Jet Ranger. Sam hides his nerves as he says his final goodbyes to his wife, Leonie. It's time to go. The helicopter practically skims the surface of the dunes as Steve flies fast and low towards the coast. It gives Sam a final chance to check the conditions along his route. The flight takes less than an hour. It's going to take Sam a minimum of 5 days to walk back through the desert to the canyon where his wife will be waiting.
The realisation dawned on me as we were flying into the coast on the chopper that this was it. I was going to have to actually go and do that, and I suddenly noticed my hands were shaking.
Just as Sam jumps out of the helicopter, Steve calls to him, "You're stark raving mad." As he shields himself from the sand thrown up by the rotors, Sam wonders what he's let himself in for. Could Steve be right? But it's no time for indecision. This is the point of no return. It's just Sam and the desert from now on.
When the helicopter left, it certainly was, that was it, was very final. But I had to sit and really focus on the navigation so that I didn't think too much about what was coming up.
All by himself, with the pounding Atlantic on one side and the desert on the other, Sam can't help thinking about all the ghosts that could be lurking around here. The shipwrecked mariners who just didn't make it.
It was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon we actually arrived, and it's pretty spooky on the coast there. It's very, very strange light with the fog and the noise of the breakers coming in from the South Atlantic. It's just a very spooky place. It makes me feel very nervous.
Sam turns his back on the ocean and starts walking into a sea of sand dunes, where daytime temperatures are typically in their 40s, well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but plummet at night. Where sandstorms and heat stroke threaten his survival, and where he only has an aging map and his compass to rely on to find his way through.
Probably took me about 20 minutes to get my wits about me and start walking. And with the fog cover, it got dark very early, so I only got 2 hours walking in.
As he expected, Sam's finding it hard going, trudging through the soft sand. But with a heavy pack on his back, weighed down by 15 litres of water, his rate of progress is even slower than he'd anticipated. He had hoped to cover 10 kilometres on his first day.
I made very few kilometres the first day. The wind howling around.
The fog around the coast creates incredible levels of humidity for miles inland.
I was soaked to the skin by the time I set up camp. Can't see any stars, it's getting dark very, very quickly. It's really chilly. All my clothes are soaking wet with sweat because it's so humid here on the coast. I'm trying to dry them all out by tomorrow. I can actually see my breath, it's that cold. Gee whiz, I haven't seen that since London.
Day 2 dawns. Sam's first full day on the dunes.
My clothes were still wet that morning, so I had to struggle back into them, which is always very unpleasant after getting out of a nice warm sleeping bag, getting back into horrible, soggy, cold, wet clothes.
He already knows his map is virtually useless. The landscape has changed far too much since it was printed. Often in a desert, dunes will conform to some kind of pattern or regularity. But here he's faced with every kind of shape and configuration imaginable. The only thing the dunes here have in common is they're all huge.
The next set of dunes were very confused all over the place. It's quite hard going.
Pretty slow progress, unfortunately. 8Ks, really big dunes. Kind of worried about the lack of progress we're making, but I hopefully can make it up after we get over the big linear dunes, which I should make by this evening. I'm seriously thinking of dumping some of the water or drinking some of it because it's bloody heavy and it's really slowing me up.
But dumping water now would be a big mistake.
Well, the idea of dumping some of the water, I wasn't really that seriously thought about. It was more me just sort of whinging about the weight of the pack. Well, after slow progress this morning, definitely made up a bit of time, which is great. Still, the pack's way too heavy. I'm still making up my mind about what to do with the water situation.
Sam has now been alone out here for about 24 hours. Back at base camp, right at the other side of the desert, Steve Groves is taking off, ready to check whether Sam's okay, if he can find him. No helicopter this time, just a single-engine Cessna. It's a lot cheaper to take up than a helicopter, but it won't be able to land in the dunes, even if there is a problem.
Well, Steve's job trying to find me was not an easy one. I had no contact with him, no radio. The way he actually found me was by dead reckoning. He took a GPS coordinate when he dropped me off, and then on the first day, he would have guesstimated the kilometres I'd walked and the rough track, and then he would zigzag up and down that until he would find me. The plane actually flew over at 1700, actually found me, which was a mixed blessing. Whether it was nice to know they'd found me, but in some ways it was an intrusion, having a very noisy piece of man-made stuff flying around.
A successful aerial recce trying to find Sam's progress through the desert. After some time we did find him. A little bit difficult trying to find an ant in a sandbox, it seems. A very small human being in a very large desert. However, we did find him, and by my estimation he's at about 14 kilometers east of the position we dropped him yesterday at the coast. So he's on track, he looks good, he's fit, and all being well, I've estimated about a 10-hour walk. He should be in this position by tomorrow.
Well, the end of day 2 at 17:20, it says in my log that the fog started rolling in again, and then it was time to set up camp and keep warm, get some food down me. The temperature variation was enormous.
But cold isn't the only thing on Sam's mind. Without a map he can rely on, he has to be able to trust his compass to keep him going in an easterly direction. But something doesn't feel right.
My compass has been doing some pretty strange things. Took a sort of very strange northwest track there for a while. Anyway, hope to sort of get on top of that tomorrow.
British explorer Sam McConnell is somewhere in the Namib Desert. Namib is a corruption of a local word meaning big, empty place. The sand dunes are certainly big, some of the largest on the planet, and the desert itself is said to be the world's oldest. It's day 3, and something strange has been happening to his compass. It's been giving all kinds of weird readings.
Well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm a bit late, but as you can see, it's pretty overcast. The sun should have been up 10 minutes ago, I suppose, but wind's finally died down. Let's hope the compass is behaving itself today, because if it carries on like yesterday, we're going to be going around in circles.
Sam's compass isn't faulty. The desert is playing tricks on him. The sand contains iron, which, over the millennia, has been steadily oxidizing, creating the deep orange color that's so prevalent around here. The iron is slowly turning into iron oxide, like rust. In its mineral form, it's known as magnetite, because it's magnetic. Surrounded as he is by all these mounds of ferrous and magnetic material, it's little wonder Sam's compass is confused. Normally he could navigate, at least roughly, using the sun, but it's not always possible.
Well, finally the sun's come out, so now I can check my compass and my bearing, which makes sense, but in some ways, but not in others. Anyway, it's a bit of a worry. You're going to have to keep an eye on that, keep yomping forward. But as I said earlier, the worst case scenario is I end up walking around in circles.
What Sam doesn't realise is that he is walking around in circles, or at least in extremely wiggly lines. He's slogged through about 10 kilometres of sand so far today, but he's only 3 kilometres closer to his destination.
Navigation in the desert is pretty difficult. I was taking about 20 bearings a day. You'd be sitting on the top of one dune, you take a bearing off a recognisable feature on the next dune and then try and walk towards that. But after you started to descend, quite often the landscape completely changed. You would look up and you couldn't see the landmark you were supposed to be walking to.
This is one of the reasons my compass not working so well at the moment. Is because all the dark shadows on that dune there is magnetite, and that is throwing me off a bit. So I'm sort of zigzagging my way towards dead flay at the moment.
In the relentless sun and wind, his mind is also playing tricks.
When you're out in the desert with the wind blowing and everything, and it's all you hear is your ears start playing tricks on you, and for quite a while I kept thinking I was hearing planes all the time flying around, so I was always wondering if it was Steve or not.
As he stumbles towards the end of another day, he knows that by now, Steve will be trying to locate him again. But with his erratic course and the increasingly windy conditions, he's aware that finding one man in tens of thousands of square kilometres of sand is a tall order.
Particularly difficult aerial recce with a strong wind and low cloud, but we did find Sam. He's now in a tent, hunkered down for the evening with the possibility of strong winds.
Well, it's a bit chaotic in here at the moment. We've got a hell of a wind blowing from the northwest. It's 2:30 in the morning. Oh, it's just died down a second, but it feels like the tid's about to blow away, which I hope it doesn't.
Sam's gone to sleep in a howling wind. The following morning, after 3 days of intense heat, he wakes up to rain.
A rainbow in the desert, that's a first for me.
It's grey, it's wet, it's... yeah, I mean, it's really getting wet now. One thing worse than dry sand is wet sand. It sticks to everything. It's horrible. I'm trying to keep the camera dry here.
Although he always knew it was going to be cold at night, Sam didn't expect the chilly daytime rain he's now run into. He's grateful he decided to bring his tent, only a last-minute addition to his kit. Now he wishes he'd brought even more protection.
I didn't take any waterproofs, so I didn't think I needed it. Of course, you know, I knew about the fog, I've seen it before. Normally it burns off by late morning, lunchtime, and obviously the further away you get from the coast, the less likelihood there is to be fog. But I've certainly never experienced fog where it starts precipitating like a Scotch mist. When the drizzle did first hit me, I thought, oh, this is ridiculous, you know. Anyway, so I was laughing about it, and then after half an hour the laughter stopped as all my clothes were soaked through and I was starting to really get very, very, very cold. Well, I'm laying up now and making myself a cup of hot water. You can see my breath, it's that cold, eh? Who would have thought it, middle of the Namib Desert, about to die of hypothermia, which was one thing I wasn't banking on. It was more heat stroke I was worried about. Anyway, beats the Northern Line on rush hour.
Sam only brought 15 litres of water with him, barely half of the doctor's most optimistic assessment of what he really needs out here to avoid dehydration. But now those vital supplies are dwindling fast as he uses the water just to keep warm. Once it's all gone, there's no way he can possibly survive out here.
Well, it's been a bit more warmed up now, and the rain seems to, well, drizzle seems to have stopped, so I'm going to pack up. It's 10 o'clock, so hopefully we can make up for lost time. Probably not, but let's keep hoping. Well, during the walk, I was only going to have one ration a day, and that was going to be in the evening meal, which was going to make this sort of day something to look forward to. But during the cold part of the trip, I felt it more prudent to have split the ration into two and turn it into more of a soup than a stew. So I can have 2 meals a day and therefore keep the calories coming in slightly more regularly than having one splurge at the end of the day. I've had to put my tent up again. It's lunchtime. It started raining again. Looks like we're still pretty stormy looking out there. Hasn't really kind of brightened up. Anyway, we've just come up against the really big dunes. I mean, I'm at 600 odd metres now. I dread to think how big these dunes are, but I'm certainly not climbing over the top of them, that's for sure. So I'm going to cut south now, go around the bottom of this one, and hopefully find an easier route in to sort of strike dead flake.
It's well into the afternoon, and at last the cold has dissipated. In this land of contrast, it's now turning into another extremely hot day. All the worse for climbing the really high dunes Sam's now reached. As the afternoon passes, he finally realizes that his problems with the compass have pushed him miles behind schedule. Add to that his rapidly dwindling water supplies and the prospects of him even reaching Dead Flay, his halfway point, and looking slim.
I've had a really shit afternoon. Basically the compass is way out. I've pretty much walked in a circle. I knew there was going to be a magnetic deviation from the magnetite, but I didn't, in my wildest dreams, ever think it was going to be as bad as it was.
Now he's aware of the problem, he'll try to check his compass regularly against the direction of the sun. But that's only of limited use when he's trying to follow precise bearings. Luckily, the compass only goes wild when he's near particularly large concentrations of metallic material.
It's taken me pretty much the rest of the afternoon just to get back to roughly on track. And it's going to be another cold night by the looks of it. The fog's just kind of starting up. I've got 5 litres of water left, which isn't a huge problem, but I've only got 1 day's ration of food left. Well, I can tough that out, I reckon.
But Sam's main worry as he settles in his tent for a 4th night on the dunes is that there's been no sign at all of Steve's plane. In fact, Steve is up in the air, desperately searching for his friend. He's tried flying along Sam's anticipated route and several kilometres either side of it, but nothing.
Not so lucky today, unfortunately. We spent about an hour and 20 minutes on an area recce. Didn't find Sam or any signs of him. I guess this is due to the strong winds that have covered his tracks. Remember, he's got some big dunes in front of him, so he could be 800, maybe 1,000 metres off track. And there's no way we're going to see that if we can't follow his footsteps.
But what Steve doesn't realise is the strange effect the metallic content of the dunes has been having on Sam's compass. For most of the day, he's been much further off track than Steve could possibly have known. He's looking in the wrong place.
Anyway, I think it's time for a good rest and look at it again tomorrow morning with fresh eyes, I suppose. Anyway, let's see what happens.
It's day 5. Sam's hardly got any food or water left, but he's trying to look on the bright side.
Well, there you go, chaps. The highlight of my day. God, it was so cold last night. I had a -40 sleeping bag. I'm in a tent. I'm wearing a fleece, my trousers, and I'm still. Ugh. Yeah. freezing cold. What is this supposed to be? Don't look at it too hard.
As he starts out on day 5, he has no idea how far he's really travelled and how far he has yet to walk. Scale and distance take on a new meaning in this desert.
One of the problems out here is perception of height, distance. Obviously with the dunes they're fairly featureless, you have nothing to compare the size of a dune to, so there's no car there in front of it to give you any idea. So sometimes, for example, you'd think, God, that dune's miles away and very high, and 10 minutes later you were there and on top of it, and vice versa. Well, what kept me going was really to see what was on the other side of the next dune. I suppose I was always kind of half hoping to find a sort of half-buried temple poking out of the dunes, or a tribe of lost bushmen. And it was, you'd get to the top of a dune and you would sit down, take a break, and it would be just the scenery is just so awesome. You could sit and watch it all day, or I could.
But he knows he's not out here on a sightseeing trip. He has to reach Dead Flay, see what the water situation's like, and then make a judgment on whether he can complete the final part of his journey. The heat is really building up now. It's hotter than yesterday. Heat stroke is a real possibility. And although he's trying to conserve what's left of his water, it's disappearing all too quickly.
I knew that I could probably walk one day without water. Would have been fairly tough, but it was doable. And I knew that I was close enough to Dead Flay to make it with just enough water to spare. But certainly it's quite a concern. But you can't sit and panic about it, because if you do, then all is lost. You just have to make a plan and keep going, basically.
The only good thing about running short of water is that his pack is now considerably lighter, which means he's able to walk faster and further than any previous day. As the day progresses, more vegetation starts to appear, and in the distance, he recognizes the Whitberg mountain. They're both good signs. He reckons Dead Flay must now be only 20 kilometers or so away.
Well, this is the east wind starting up. We've had pretty much everything else. We've had freezing cold, we've had damp, we've had hot, and I suppose all we're left with now is a sandstorm. So if this carries on, it looks like we might get one of those as well. Well, it's midday. Just done my calculations. We're about 8 k's from Dead Flay. It's getting pretty hot. Got just over 3 litres of water left, which is getting a bit grim. Whether I can make it to Cesarium or not, well, we'll wait and see, but let's get to Dead Flay first.
It's really not that far to Dead Flay now, but Sam has finally reconciled himself to the inevitable. It's unrealistic to suppose he could walk any further than Dead Flay without dying of thirst. Yesterday there was no sign of Steve's plane. He just hopes Steve can find him today. With no radio, it's impossible to get word to anyone, but there is one possible solution. Choosing an eastward-facing slope, Sam writes a rescue message in the sand. British explorer Sam McConnell is attempting to walk across the world's oldest desert in Namibia. He's almost completed the most difficult stretch from the Atlantic coast, 50 kilometers inland, across the world's highest sand dunes. He's survived intense daytime heat and the bitter cold of desert night. But his biggest problem has been the metallic content of the sands that have been giving him freak readings on his compass. Wandering well off course for much of the last few days, he's used up almost all his water. He hasn't enough left to take him to his ultimate destination, the Cesarium Canyon. So he's been forced to write a message in the sand, hoping his pilot friend Steve Groves will spot it from the air.
There he was on top of a high dune with the letters marked in the sand DVPM, which means dead flay sometime late this afternoon. Although he's got a long way to go in this hot sun.
Well, the final day was good. We had saw the guys flew over in the morning. I wrote a message for them in the sand saying I was going to be at dead flay in the afternoon. And so that meant I really better get my skates on.
And indeed, Sam does get his skates on. Pushing forward quicker than ever before, he's intent on reaching dead flay by the afternoon. He's not been able to communicate his precise intentions to Steve, just the location. Steve won't know whether Sam wants to be picked up in the helicopter or to be resupplied. But for Sam, there's only one choice now.
For me, the idea of resupplying at dead flay and carrying on was frankly cheating in my books.
He makes it to the rendezvous point, and it's still daylight, but there's no sign yet of the helicopter.
Well, I've made it. Can't believe it. I'm finally at dead flay. I was kind of hoping somebody would be here to meet me, but there you go.
Certainly the initial euphoria of arriving at dead flay when I climbed over that last sand dune and suddenly saw the white pan with the dead trees on it. I knew I was pretty much home free. But the fact that nobody was waiting for me there was fairly confidence-sapping.
Sam has no way of telling Steve that he's down to his emergency water rations. And now it looks like another night in the desert until help arrives.
Well, I made my way to go to where I knew where there's some trees, to go and set up camp there and wait for them. I was hoping they were going to come in that evening, but as the night drew in, I knew that they weren't. So that was quite frustrating in some ways, knowing that they were, possibly sitting in a bar drinking cold beers, and I was stuck out on the edge of the Dune Sea with just with 500 millilitres of water and no food.
Well, that's it. All I've got left now is 2 of these 500 ml rations of water, which I'm going to have to open one of them because I'm feeling pretty grotty after not drinking enough today. And fingers crossed, the guys are going to come and get me tomorrow.
So I was trying to open this sachets of water with heat stroke and thumbs and fingers that had all swollen up, and I couldn't make a fist, and I'm dying of thirst trying to open these things up and actually spilling most of it.
That's a lot of ketchup sessions. Anyway, the sun's going down now. At the end of the day, it's been real.
Despite spilling his water, Sam knows he'll be picked up in the morning, which is more than any of the shipwrecked mariners could have hoped for had they even made it this far in their desperate attempts to find a source of water.
Reasons why the helicopter and guys didn't make it to the RV point on the end of day 5 were when they'd seen, or Steve had seen me write DVPM in the sand, he tipped his wings, which means it's the international sign that he's understood the message, so I knew that they knew that I wanted to be at dead flay. But when they got back, they looked at the map, the distance I had to cover from lunchtime to that evening, and also the topography of some of the really high dunes there. They decided that I probably wouldn't make it. A lot of people asked me if I was going to be lonely on this trip. I mean, I wasn't lonely, but I certainly was alone. I certainly worried about it before I started, whether I'd go a bit doolally out there all on my own for 4 or 5 days, but in the end of it, it was a very relaxing experience.
I mean, I would love to do that walk. I'd do it again tomorrow. And I think it's just such a special place.
So even after giving it his best shot and knowing how to find the nearest fresh water to the coast, Sam didn't make it. But he's still convinced it can be done.
With the knowledge I have now, I probably would be able to make it from the coast to the spring, Cestrim. That's assuming that the start-off point on the Skeleton Coast was the same. But if you get shipwrecked, you don't normally have a choice where you end up.
The helicopter did arrive at Dead Vley, and then Leonie arrived about an hour later in the Land Rover, and yeah, it was fantastic to see her walking across the salt pan there at Dead Vley with a nice thermos of coffee and a tear in her eye.